So, unfortunately, the fallout from yesterday's news that Xbox decided to close 4 Zenimax studios has just continued over the past day. There's been a number of different reports from several outlets talking about what's been happening within Xbox and within Bethesda over the past day, and in particular, what employees and staff and devs have been saying about the situation. And we really need to talk about it because not only does it re-emphasize how much of an unfortunate situation this really is, but it also just makes me even more concerned about the future of Bethesda and, of course, Xbox as well. So I'm going to go through all this news and share my thoughts and opinions throughout, and let me know what you think in the comments below. If you missed my video yesterday, by the way, talking about the situation and my initial impressions, I'll put that on the screen right now. But let's get into some of these reports. So first of all, IGN. IGN was actually the one, I believe, that first broke this news that Xbox was shutting down those Zenimax studios. And they came out with another report, which I'll link in the description below, talking about how Arcane Austin was working on DLC and updates for Redfall before the studio was closed down. So they said that reportedly these updates, this DLC was going to be coming out very soon in particular, and this is something they announced, ages ago, but they were working on a hero pass for the game, and there were going to be 2 new DLC characters coming to the game as part of that, and that was apparently meant to release this Halloween. And of course, that's no longer happening because the studio has now closed, and as we know, Xbox is going to be doing a make good for Redfall and that particular hero pass content, right? And when reached out to by IGN about this, both Bethesda and Xbox declined to comment. And apparently as well, they were also working on that promised offline mode, and that offline mode was meant to be releasing this month. So if this decision wasn't made, if the studio wasn't closing the past day, in all likelihood, people that are still playing Redfall, or perhaps that wanted to get into it, and I know there's not that many people anymore, but perhaps those people would have been able to enjoy and play an offline mode for Redfall. But now seemingly that is no longer happening. And what's very unfortunate about that situation is that hypothetically, let's say at some stage down the line, Xbox or Zenimax or Bethesda, whoever is actually responsible for this decision, let's say they do decide to take down the servers for Redfall, even though they said that it's going to stay online. We know that these things can change, as we've seen in this past day. Let's say they do decide to take the servers down for the game. That would mean that Redfall, at that point, would no longer be playable. There would be no way to play the game because it's purely an online game. And the likelihood of that happening, given how many people are left playing the game, is probably very high. So without an offline mode, there would be no way to keep playing Redfall moving forward into the future. So that kind of sucks. Like, in retrospect, it would have been nice to at least have that offline mode there, given they had already put the work in, and we are already in May. Why not just let them release it, right? Why not say, hey, we're going to pay you for another month or so to get this last bit of content out because you've been working hard on it. And then after that, we'll, make you redundant and you'll still get your severance. Why they made the decision so quickly, so imminently, I don't know. It seems to undermine the work that they already put in, but that was just one report. We've got several to talk about today. So then Jeff Grubb, talking about the wider Xbox team and Xbox Game Studios specifically, on the recent Giant Bomb podcast, and again, that's linked in the description below, he said that Perfect Dark is also in a very rough state. So Perfect Dark, as we know, was being developed by The Initiative, and then later on Crystal Dynamics, who came on board to help out, I think it was in 2021, a few years ago. And this studio, The Initiative, was announced back in E3 of 2018 by Phil Spencer. And that was going to be Microsoft's very first game studio in Santa Monica. So it was a pretty big deal, one of Microsoft's internal Xbox game studios. And at the Game Awards 2020, this Perfect Dark reboot was announced, and it was revealed that the studio, The Initiative specifically, was working on it. But Jeff Grubb says that apparently it doesn't sound like the game has come together all that well, And they don't even know, after all these years of development, whether they actually want to stick with a first-person view as an FPS or potentially third-person, or maybe both. They still haven't nailed down that core design concept of the game, which is quite surprising given how far removed we are from the initial announcement of the game, right? So there is a risk that this game could get cancelled, like we saw with Mighty Doom and like we've seen with other games, and I'll get to that in a second. There were unannounced games that these studios were pitching before they were closed. So could this Perfect Dark reboot also get cancelled before it ever sees the light of day? Possibly. Because of these issues, could the initiative also get closed down and get shuttered? Possibly. So let's get into some of those reports, right? The next one is from The Verge, and The Verge is saying there is growing discontent within Xbox and fear among employees about what is going to be coming next. I think a lot of these employees and staff members feel it's not going to just stop with Bethesda or Zenimax owned studios. It's also going to extend specifically to Xbox game studios. So as we know, and this was talked about publicly by a number of different employees, but employees were shocked by this latest round of redundancies, especially because, as you could imagine, they just went through a round earlier this year, 1,900 staff or so. So when that just happened, and there were only a few months after that, of course, some people would be shocked. And even though, as I said in my last video, you can't really be surprised anymore, given what we've seen in the past year in the games industry, I think it's completely understandable if people are still shocked in that moment, because I certainly was, right? And apparently inside of Xbox, there is uncertainty about what the future holds, and there is questions about Microsoft's overall gaming strategy. So Game Pass numbers continue to slow in terms of subscriber growth. And as we know, Xbox console sales have become particularly lackluster. And I think that's been spurred on by this new multi-platform strategy that Xbox or Microsoft has adopted, because why do you need to necessarily buy an Xbox anymore if some of those exclusive games are going to make their way to PC or PlayStation 5 or Nintendo Switch, right? And we know that hardware revenue for Xbox was down 31% year over year due to this. And we also know that the acquisition of Activision Blizzard recently added significantly to the bottom line of Xbox's revenue and profits. But without that acquisition, hypothetically, let's say it didn't happen, Xbox content and services, according to The Verge, would have only been up by a single % in growth, and their overall gaming revenue would have actually declined without this acquisition. So even though on paper the numbers look great, it's only because they acquired this company for many tens of billions of dollars, right? So you have to read between the lines a little bit when it comes to looking at their profitability at the moment and their revenue at the moment. And because of that, they've had, according to The Verge, internal debates about whether to put the new Call of Duty onto Game Pass and future Call of Duty games onto Game Pass. And apparently this debate has been going on for a while, but there are concerns that they're going to lose out on a bunch of revenue from sales of Call of Duty games if they were to put those games onto Game Pass, because of course that's expected. That's the whole point of Game Pass, is people don't need to buy the games outright. You have a Game Pass subscription, you can enjoy, seemingly to this date anyways, all new Xbox titles there. So if Call of Duty is available on there, the next Call of Duty, which they're still meant to be revealing in next month's showcase, which we'll talk about later in this video, if they do decide to put it on Game Pass, yeah, a lot of people don't need to buy the game outright, and you can say goodbye to a hell of a lot of revenue. And we know how popular, and that's an understatement, but we know how popular Call of Duty is and how much money it still makes to this day. I know a lot of you, including myself, don't play the game anymore, but it's still incredibly popular. So that's a lot of revenue on the table that just could go bye-bye if they were to put the game onto Game Pass. And that obviously calls into question whether their strategy with Game Pass is still the right one, right? Has this big bet of theirs paid off if they're questioning whether to put some of their new titles onto the service? So we'll talk about that a little bit later as well. And because of this, Microsoft has apparently been considering increasing the price of Game Pass Ultimate again, because it happened recently. And then furthermore, there are also whispers among employees that core Xbox game studios, so not just Zenimax studios, but core Xbox game studios are also set for cutbacks and potential closures next. So The Verge is saying that, and then Jason Schreier of Bloomberg came out with his own report essentially confirming that. And I'll link that, of course, in the description below. So Jason Schreier says that cost-cutting, redundancies, and closures aren't finished yet within Xbox. That is the inside baseball happening right now. So this week, apparently Xbox offered voluntary severance to staff at Zenimax, including producers, QA, and other staff. So though they didn't let go of those staff and make them redundant, they are offering them voluntary severance to see if anybody wants to go, take some money, you can go. That's interesting to me because either way, those people would be getting severance. So if you want some of those people to go and you've just let go of a bunch of other staff and closed several studios, why not just make the decision to let some of them go? Maybe they're just trying to get rid of the people that do want to leave in light of all of this, and you may not want to keep those people around if they've lost confidence in the company and they don't want to work there anymore. So part of me understands that. But apparently they've offered voluntary severance to those people. And again, others across Xbox have been told that more cuts are on the way. And let's talk about some of those new games that apparently were being pitched by some of these studios which have closed down, namely Tango Gameworks and Arcane Austin. So Tango Gameworks was in the process of pitching a sequel to Hi-Fi Rush before being shut down. And we know how beloved that game was last year. We know, apparently, in Xbox's eyes and their public statements, how much of a success it was. It had millions of players. We know how many people would have been looking forward to that, and how unfortunate it is that we're not going to be seeing that sequel. We possibly might never receive any kind of sequel to Hi-Fi Rush ever again, because what studio is going to want to take it on board when it really was Tango Gameworks' passion project and baby? That's going to be a tough sell if they try and put it onto another studio. And why would they do that if they already shut down Tango Gameworks? It seems like they're just done with any kind of sequel for Hi-Fi Rush. So that's very unfortunate. But then also Arcane Austin was in the process of pitching a new single-player immersive sim, such as potentially a new entry in the Dishonored series. And now, of course, they were shut down as well. That breaks my heart, man. I would have loved to have seen a new game in the Dishonored series. I would have loved to have seen a new Prey. Like, Arcane Austin proved with Prey, they are incredibly talented and good at making immersive sims. So whether it was a Prey sequel or a Dishonored sequel or heck, a new IP, something new, something different, we were bound to get an incredible title. Yes, Redfall didn't perform well. Yes, Redfall had a lot of issues at launch and it never really recovered. But Redfall was not what Arcane Austin was really known for. Broader than that, it wasn't really what Arcane as a whole, including Leon, was worked for. And there's a whole debate that we can get into as to why they did Redfall in the first place and why they approached such a different title. But we're not going to get into that now. But they wanted to go back to their roots and do an immersive sim, a single-player immersive sim, potentially a Dishonored game. And now we're not going to get that. And to support those pitches, apparently Tango and Arcane Austin were wanting to hire additional staff to support these projects, and that might have actually led, in part at least, to these closures. So this morning, at the time of this recording, so Wednesday morning, there was a town hall held by Xbox, I think specifically for Zenimax staff, that was ran by Xbox president Matt Booty. Again, Bloomberg covers this in their article in the description. So in that town hall, it sounds like it didn't go over too well. He praised Hi-Fi Rush, but didn't specify exactly why the company also shut down Tango Gameworks. And I could see why that's a tough pill to swallow when you're shutting the studio down that you're praising at the same time. It's difficult to reconcile. In that town hall as well, Booty said that the company studios had apparently been spread too thin, and that leaders across the division felt understaffed. So instead of hiring to support them, they just closed down the studios to free up resources elsewhere. And he apparently said the shutdown of Arcane Austin wasn't connected necessarily to the failure of Redfall, but I struggle to see that, because if Redfall was an incredible, huge success, Maybe there was more of a chance they would have kept them on board, but we just saw Tango Gameworks get shut down as well. And Hi-Fi Rush was a successful game in their eyes. Again, I keep re-emphasizing that's what they said publicly. So if they shut down Tango, even if Redfall was a success, maybe they wouldn't have even kept Arcane Austin open. And then also as well, Jill Braff, the head of Zenimax Studios, spoke at that town hall. And she said it was hard to support 9 studios across the world with a very lean central team. Or she said they were about to topple over. So that also in part led to the shutdowns. And then they both confirmed apparently that Arcane and Tango were asking for additional staff. And that was another big factor as to why they closed those studios. And then to add on to that, there was another report by The Verge about this very town hall. So it almost certainly happened if you have Bloomberg and The Verge both reporting on it. But apparently in that town hall, Matt said, quote, "We need smaller games that give us prestige and awards." That is what they said. Barely a day after shutting down Tango Gameworks, who produced Hi-Fi Rush, a smaller title that was critically acclaimed, that got them a bunch of awards, including Game of the Year awards, and it was a success in their eyes and hit at least 3 million players, if not more. He said that statement and that line, even given that title. It's baffling. It's baffling, and I don't blame Zenimax and Bethesda staff listening in on that meeting for being like, what the hell? I would be completely shocked too. I wouldn't be able to interpret what was being said because it's completely contradictory. It really is. So I think after all of these reports, right, we have a number of lingering questions which really need to be addressed sooner rather than later. And I don't know how exactly Xbox could go about this, but number one, I think it's clear right now that Xbox's big bet that they took on Xbox Game Pass really hasn't paid off at least as much as they would have liked. So what happens to the Game Pass? What is the strategy there with that service? If they're already thinking about not putting the next Call of Duty game onto Game Pass, what use is it going to serve? Is there a risk that Game Pass is either shut down or not supported as much as it usually is? And could numbers of subscribers actually decline on that service? Because it still has millions upon millions of users. There is still a use there for Game Pass. But if they're already thinking about not putting new titles on there, then what's the point of having it in the first place? So that's number one. Number two, how on earth is Xbox going to approach their showcase next month? How do they go about it, right? Like, it would be one thing if they had the showcase and announced a bunch of exciting stuff and then did the redundancies and the closures, because you're not having to address that in the moment of the showcase. But they've done it in a pretty bad order, because now they have to confront it in some way. They can't just come out all fine and dandy and happy and say, hey, look at all this exciting stuff that we have this year. And they do have exciting stuff this year, right? Like, we're literally getting Hellblade 2 in a couple of weeks. But at that showcase, seemingly we're going to be getting new titles announced. But how do they address the elephant in the room? They can't just ignore it. Phil Spencer, Sarah Bond, Matt Booty have to talk about it in some capacity. So how do they do that? Do they try and come out in front of it before that showcase? Do they do it at the beginning of the showcase? Like, it's going to be a very, very hard thing for Xbox to try and approach. And in all honesty, there is no good way to go about it. You are going to get backlash, you're going to get flack, and they're going to have to cop that on the chin. And of course they would know this. They would know this when they started thinking about making this decision to close down these studios. But they're going to have to come up with some sort of strategy. But there will be no good solution here. They're going to cop flack either way. So let's see what happens in that regard. Number three, how could they begin to start the arduous process of slowly regaining trust and public confidence in the Xbox brand? I talked about this in my last video. I don't blame people for not wanting to trust Xbox anymore on what they say publicly. Again, on the exclusivity stuff, they said that we want to bring exclusive games to Xbox. We acquired Zenimax for that reason. And they later changed their mind on that, even though partly I understood why they made that decision. They still, in the eyes of many, went back on their word. And then with this, they say that Hi-Fi Rush was a success for them, and then they shut down Tango Gameworks. So just another occasion of them going back on their word. How do they start that process of regaining that trust? Or is it a lost cause? Is it just impossible for Xbox to do that in the future? And I think that's a serious problem, especially if they want to continue to try and grow and nurture this community, especially with Activision Blizzard on board and them spending so many billions of dollars on acquiring that company. It seems like Microsoft is very much under increased scrutiny because of that acquisition, and possibly Satya and the rest of the wider execs, although higher up execs than Microsoft, are wanting a much bigger return on investment and faster growth. And that possibly is what is leading to these closures. And some people in my last video said that, oh, maybe they're using this as a way to shift funds around to focus on titles like Fallout 5 and whatever. However, the problem with that is that there is also an equal likelihood that that money isn't shifted around and that they just kind of keep it to increase their margins. That could also be what they do. And they didn't actually say that they were going to shift staff to BGS or to another studio to work on those bigger titles. They just said that our overall strategy is reprioritization, but we still don't know if they're actually going to be doing that, and if that money is going to go elsewhere into Microsoft and not necessarily stick within Xbox and the gaming brand. We just don't know. So public confidence is going to be a big thing for them to try and rebuild, and I don't know whether that's going to be possible, at least in the next couple of years, right? It's going to be a very long process. And then, of course, the final big question is, who else are they going to shut down? Who else is going to be let go and be made redundant? If these reports are to be believed, and I certainly do believe them, who else is on the chopping block? Because it seems like studios specifically within Xbox game studios are going to be affected in some sort of way if they are truly not done with this cost-cutting regime. So who else is going to be affected? Could it be Obsidian if Avowed isn't a success? Could it be Ninja Theory, who's about to release Hellblade 2? We don't know if that title's really going to move the needle. They haven't really put much marketing behind it. So there's a chance that after releasing the game, either Ninja Theory is closed or is severely downsized. And that typically happens. Even when the games industry is in a good state, you frequently see studios downsize after releasing a game because they don't need all those devs. So my bottom dollar bet is absolutely Ninja Theory is getting affected heavily after Hellblade 2. Whether it or not it's a full studio closure or a bunch of staff are getting let go, something has to give with that studio, in my mind, after letting go people and companies like Tango Gameworks and Arcane Austin. And what about other studios? What about the initiative working on Perfect Dark? If the game is in a bad state and they don't see a potential future for it, I could easily see them, making staff at the initiative redundant or completely closing that studio. So I think this is going to come to a head, probably sooner rather than later. We might even see more of these reports and maybe even an announcement come out later this month before the showcase to say, here are the further studios that we're letting go, because there's no way that they're done. There's just no way. If their cost-cutting regime is still continuing even after the initial redundancies earlier this year of 1,900 staff, in my eyes, there is no way that they're done until they come out definitively and say, we are done. And even then, you don't really know. I think expect to see and hear something very, very soon. And then I guess another question is, what does this mean for new and unique IP? Are they just going to be focusing on the tried and tested titles and IP like Fallout and Call of Duty and whatever, I think that's also a risk, especially given Matt Booty's email that I covered in yesterday's video. But let me know what you think in the comments below. Lots to talk about, lots of reports today. Hopefully I've done a good job presenting that to you. And until next time, this has been the Lone Vault Wanderer. Please take care of yourselves, and would you kindly keep fighting a good fight.